Elena Gomez, president and CFO of Toast, a tech platform powering restaurants, handling everything from payments to operations. Her story starts far from the boardroom. The daughter of immigrants from El Salvador, her parents worked multiple jobs and instilled a relentless work ethic. She never set out to be a CFO. At first, she wanted a job that could help her family, but she kept pushing, taking risks, learning fast, and stepping outside her comfort zone. Now she's one of the few women at the top of tech leadership and is using her platform to open doors for others. She says leadership isn't about knowing everything, it's about building the right team and staying a student your entire career. A CNBC changemaker, Elena Gomez is in the Changemakers and Power Players spotlight. Elena, thank you so much for joining us on this Changemakers and Power Players podcast, and congrats on being named to our CNBC Changemakers list. You are president and CFO of Toast. You've really driven its transition to a publicly traded company, helped grow and scale this business as it tackles this huge market opportunity. I guess just to start out, what have been your biggest milestones in the past year?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. When I think about the milestones of the company over the course of the last really several years, because change always takes time. One of the key things was really becoming a public company and getting into that rhythm and cadence of being a public company, which when you've been private for a very long time does require a lot of change management. But also, we're really proud of launching new verticals that we're very excited about. We launched in international. We launched our retail business, which is a adjacency to our restaurant business. So really excited about the company and where it's going, and just being able to launch this and help merchants all around the world is really exciting for us.
Yeah, I mean, and such a big year, but I want to go back to the very beginning because
Sure.
now you're helping run this enormous business. You've done a lot of philanthropic work, but your origin story may be a little unexpected. Your parents are immigrants. Your mom was a bookkeeper. Your dad was a truck driver, and all three of their kids attended college and have had these incredible careers. One brother's a consultant, other in TV. Tell us about your childhood and what it was like growing up with your siblings and your parents and what kind of values they instilled in you.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I actually just drove by my childhood home the other day, so you're hitting at my heart. So I would say the first thing that comes to mind is work ethic. And so my parents, being immigrants from El Salvador, one of the things that they instilled in us from a very young age was the importance of work ethic and the fact that we had to really make them proud because they were immigrants. They were working very hard. My mom had multiple jobs. My dad was a milk driver here in San Francisco. And so I always saw them working all the time, multiple jobs. And one thing that instilled in me was the pride they had in their work. My dad was incredibly proud truck driver. He ended his career at FedEx, and he would win Employee of the Month all the time because FedEx really valued being on time. And he was in his 70s, and his boss was really young, and he was one of the best employees they had in that warehouse. So just an example of how he led throughout his whole career. My mom always managed multiple jobs. And so seeing that growing up made me have this ambition to think about, what can I do differently? How can I change the trajectory of my family and really the trajectory of my parents as well? And so I feel that they really instilled in us this work ethic and also have confidence. Something I tell my kids today is, you walk in a room and there's no reason why you can't be the same as someone right next to you.
And so when you were growing up in the Bay Area, did you have aspirations of working in tech, of being an executive? What were your plans?
It's interesting that you say that. My first goal was really just to land a job, to be honest, and a job that I could help my parents. And I think I did that. I definitely helped them as I got older. But then I started realizing that this work ethic and this principle of always doing more than you're asked. Don't just do what is asked of you, but try to accomplish more and try to showcase your skills really stayed with me throughout my whole career, and that's something that can't be taught, really. It's something that's innate in you. And never imagined I'd be a CFO, to be honest. I was working at Salesforce about 11 years ago or so, and I remember one of my colleagues said, you should either come work for me or go be a CFO somewhere. And so that inspired me to think, wow, I could actually go do that and do it well, given what I've showcased here at Salesforce. And so that was the first time I thought I could get into this role as a CFO. To be honest, my parents, when I explained to them that I was a CFO, they were very proud and they understood it was a really important role. But because we're just different generations, I'm not exactly sure if they understood. My mom is still alive, but I'm not exactly sure if they actually understand the role of a CFO and the impact a CFO has on strategy. But they do understand one thing is work ethic is central to how I operate. And definitely they see how hard I work as well.
But it sounds like, your mother was a bookkeeper. It sounds like your grandfather encouraged you to pursue the world of finance. It's not like you were raised by artists and decided to get into business.
True, true. Yeah, my grandfather, when he immigrated here, he was my nanny, and so I remember as a very young age, he would ask me to count his money, and I would ask him, "Why am I counting your money, abuelito?" And he'd say, "Well, one day you're gonna grow up and be an accountant, and, you need to know how to count money." And in fact, he was not wrong in that case. But I view the accounting profession was incredibly foundational to my career, absolutely. And then I fell in love with finance and fell in love with how businesses work. And now I've fallen in love with growing businesses, which is what I've done as even at Salesforce, at Zendesk, and now at Toast. But accounting and finance are foundational. We're at the center of a lot of strategic decisions in every company, and so that's what I really enjoy and how I enjoy spending my time.
Yeah. And it sounds like your childhood really impacted the way you approach work, your leadership style. And also, it sounds like you have two brothers, maybe the way you felt about being the only woman in a room. Because I'm sure working in the tech ecosystem in San Francisco, you're often in the minority.
Oh, absolutely. I always joke when we go to tech events, there's no line at the women's bathroom and a long line at the men's bathroom. So it sort of showcases events that you go to. Absolutely, though my brother's obviously very successful as well in their own right. And one thing that we all have in common is that work ethic. And in tech, to the point of your question, that was something that I fell into after working at Charles Schwab. I decided to go work at Visa, and at the time I thought, well, Visa is a bank, but in reality, Visa was my first foray into the technology world, and then that landed me at Salesforce, Zendesk, and now Toast. And being in tech, what you see, and I see especially as a CFO, there are not that many women in leadership roles. If you look at the Fortune 500 and you look at the percentage of CEOs that are female, it's around 11% as of the last time I looked at it, which is 2025. And when I looked at the data as of 2020, it was in the low single digits. So while we've moved, we really can't take a victory lap because there's still a lot to go, a lot to do. 90%, almost 90% of CEOs in the Fortune 500 are male. And when you do another click and say, well, how many CFOs are female in the Fortune 500? It's a little better. It's closer to 20%, but that still means 80% are men. So that's why I think my role is so important. And I set an example for many younger generations to come to be hopefully in my role.
Yeah, no, and the statistics are remarkable for me in large part because they've changed so little. And so much about our
Exactly.
culture has changed, but the sort of the origin of my book, When Women Lead, sort of looking at the women like you who have defied the odds and managed to succeed despite the fact that you are sort of by definition exceptional, and you have to be exceptional. Um, representing, being a CFO as a rare female CFO, being a woman in tech, were you ever intimidated or were you aware of the fact that you were the only woman or one of only a couple women in the room? Or do you think was there something about growing up with brothers that prepared you for it that made you less sensitive to it?
It's a really great question. So I do consider myself a little bit of a tomboy. I can hang with the boys, but definitely, Julia, when I go to conferences, especially banker conferences, you look around the room and it's a sea of men. Yeah, I remember actually a great story that I tell my team all the time. I was a first time CFO. I went on a road show with my head of IR who was male. We were in New York City. I had the whole, the suit, the heels, the whole thing. I'm first time meeting investors, and they started the conversation by talking to him, and he was the head of IR, I was the CFO, and I just thought, "Wow, this is 2016, this is not 1950." And so it was interesting as the day went on, sharing that I was the CFO and seeing the reaction was something I will never forget. And I think it just speaks to where we are. There's a lot more to do. Recently, my niece was hired by a consulting firm, and she shared with me, "Thea, I'm one of the few females that was hired as a cohort in the this was summer of 2023." And she said to me, "Maybe I shouldn't wear a dress to work." And I said, "Absolutely not. Don't say that. I think you should wear a dress to work and stand out. It doesn't really matter what you wear, it's what you bring every day." But it just speaks to we still have this bias, this issue in our workforce that there's more men in leadership roles than women, and it really starts in early in your career roles, like my niece's role in consulting. Another example I'll tell you, I coach basketball, so I've coached basketball for 10 years, and
How did you
I'm a
start
coach.
doing that? Was it with
I played
because of
basketball
kids?
growing up. Yeah, so I have 2 brothers, so I played basketball growing up, and so I started coaching my daughters, and I coached for 10 years. I just retired last year, and one of the things I'll never forget, my assistant coach was 6'7". I'm 5'3", so I'm rather short, and he was away for, the weekend, and so I had the kids on my own, and I remember being at the court. This was in my hometown about maybe 5 years ago, and the referee comes over and says, "Hey, do you guys have your head coach?" And I said, "Marianne, I'm the head coach. I'm wearing a green shirt like my girls." And it just really motivated me. I'm a very competitive person to begin with, but it motivated me to outcoach the male coach on the other side. And granted, it was 8-year-old girls, but I still wanted to win.
Well, it sounds like you always want to win. I'm curious how that competitive approach applies to your career trajectory because you started out in finance, Schwab, Visa, and then you moved over really to fintech and then to Toast. How did you think about navigating that transition? Was that a goal or were you just taking the next job in front of you?
The one thing I think about with my career choices is always when I stop learning, it's time for me to consider being challenged in a new way. It has less to do with the company. I've worked at great companies. Salesforce is a great company. It was tough to leave. Zendesk was a great company, tough to leave. But I knew at some point I had stopped learning. And so Toast presented an opportunity for me to bring together my experience at Schwab, my experience in SaaS, because Toast is really fintech and SaaS combined. And so I knew that if I took the Toast role, I would be challenged in a new way because I didn't really understand fintech and payment volume and how close we're tied to the consumer sentiment, et cetera. So those are all new learnings for me at Toast, which has challenged me, and I continue to feel challenged at Toast. And that's how I think about my trajectory is really how do I continue to be a student for my entire career?
How would you encourage people to think about preparing to take the next challenge or um, being open to taking risks? It's sometimes a lot easier to stay in a stable company in a stable position than take a risk, which might have more upside potential. What would you recommend?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's so many moments where I thought I can't take that risk. I have a young family. But when I go back in time, if I were to give myself, my younger self, some advice is take the risk because some of your greatest learning actually comes when you make change, right? Some of your greatest growth opportunities come when you make change. And my own experience, I was at Schwab for a very long time, 11 years, and I continued to stay because I continued to have amazing learning in various roles in finance at Schwab. But I'll tell you, when I went to Visa, and, months later, I was at Visa for about a year and a half. In that year and a half, I probably learned more than I did in the last 5 at Schwab. And simply because I took myself out of my comfort zone and put myself in a new environment. And so that's what I would tell people. You don't realize how much you learn when you change and you force yourself to be in a new environment, force yourself to be, go work with new colleagues, force yourself to learn a new product.
But it sounds like maybe you didn't even realize that you were ready to be a CFO. It's so interesting because so many of the women I've interviewed who are CEOs or CFOs have said it didn't even occur to me to ask for the CEO position, or it didn't occur to me to apply for that CEO role or raise my hand. And then people around them said, "You're already doing the job of CEO, or you're already doing the job of a CFO."
Yes.
And that lack of recognition, I think, really reflects what's going on socially, and this idea that there are just so few women in these roles. But when your colleague said to you, you should be a CEO either for me or someone else, uh, was that shocking to you? How was it to reflect on the fact that you didn't recognize that in yourself?
Yes, it's a really great question. I've reflected on that a lot because that was the moment that I realized that I underappreciated my value. And in fact, when I went to become the CFO of Zendesk, it was already a public company. So I reflected on why did I get this opportunity, which I know maybe my male counterparts may have not reflected on that. And in fact, when I went through the interview process, I got a lot of questions about why do you think you can do this job? And so what I would tell people is in that in that assessment of whether or not I was ready, the one thing I thought about was in the same way a coach manages a team, or you think of a baseball manager managing the players on the field, you really think about, okay, I've done the finance strategy job. So I've been the pitcher before. I've done accounting. Okay, I've done first base before. Have I done tax? I haven't done tax, but I know I can hire the right talent. And so as I was interviewing for that job, that's really what I used as the framework of how I thought about me being ready for the CFO job. Because being ready to be a leader often isn't that you know it all, it's that you know how to put the right team on the field and you know how to change and course correct and substitute when the first baseman's having a bad day, you put someone else in. And so that's one thing I use a lot as a framework to think about when I see something that I might be a little bit afraid of. I think about having the right talent and having talent density on my team to help me be ready for that thing that I might be afraid of.
So, what would your recommendation be then for people who want to be able to identify the opportunities, make sure they're giving themselves the exposure and experience they need? Is there a way to that you sort of take stock? Okay, where am I right now? Have I learned everything I can? Is there a playbook for that?
Yeah, I my playbook I'll share, which is, think about what are the 3 or 4 things that you do really well, and think about your leadership style, and then think about the things that you don't do well, and make sure you're very clear on, call it your blind spots, and then hire for those. Hire people who complement the things that you're very good at. And I think it all boils down to having the right team around you when you take that big job, whether it's a CEO, whether it's your first VP job, making sure you have the right people around you. And then the other thing I would say is talk to mentors, talk to people who've been in those shoes before. They often are the biggest source of inspiration, the biggest source of advocacy for you to take the role. I remember when I was looking and evaluating the role for the CFO of Zendesk, I went for a walk with a woman in my neighborhood who's a mom. We both had kids at the school, and she didn't really understand what I did as a CFO, but she in that walk said, "You know what? I think you're ready. I think you know the answer." And I thought, wow, she doesn't really exactly know what I do, and it doesn't matter, but she knows me as an individual. And so don't forget to lean on people who may not exactly be in your workplace, but just know your character because they know a lot about your potential as well.
Yeah, we've heard from so many change makers that sometimes their best mentorship or their best advice came from people who were totally not connected to their work,
Right.
but just knew them sort of more who they are as people. Was there a mentor that changed your life or changed the trajectory of your career?
I did. Yes, there was. His name is Dave Martin, and we're still good friends. And I'll never forget, I was at Charles Schwab. I was probably in my late 20s, and I applied for a VP role. working for the chief marketing officer at Schwab. And I went up for the interview on the executive floors. It was nerve-wracking for me. I had not been on the executive floors that had security and all the fun things that go with that floor. And I walked up there and I was sitting next door to Chuck Schwab's office. So very intimidated. I was young in my career. And I came downstairs to my floor and said, I just did the interview. And he said, you got the job. I said, I did. He goes, yep, you got the job. I said, well, why did I get the job? He's like, well, because you deserve it. And also, think about this. You're going to grow more in the next 2 years than most people will grow in 5. And I will never forget those words. And so that inspired me to perform even at a higher level, to be honest, because I didn't want to let him down. I didn't want to let the chief marketing officer down. But just the fact that someone believed in me at that point in my career was really change making for me in terms of my career. And now what I think about is, how can I give someone that stretch opportunity? How can I be that champion? How can I be that person that they're talking about 20 years later?
So how are you doing that? It seems like you're really interested in paying it forward. What is the format to do that?
I have plenty of mentors and mentees, excuse me, that I keep in touch with. And they're really in all aspects of my life. It could be women in my neighborhood. I have several mentees that I coach at Toast. Women that have worked for me over many years. I spend a lot of time going on walks, giving them inspiration, trying to help them see what maybe they don't see in themselves. And that's one of the most important things that I do to pay it forward. And then everything from, honestly, coaching girls basketball, the fact that they see a woman who's working, who's coaching them, tells them that's something they can do. I'm on the board of the Haas School of Business. I'm really paying attention to diversity at the school and the curriculum at the school, et cetera. So there's many avenues for me and platforms for me to really stand behind this passion I have.
Yeah, and I understand you're involved in this event to equip the next generation of CFOs that another one of our change makers, ServiceNow, the CFO of Gina, the CFO of ServiceNow, is also involved in.
Oh, I'm so excited. Our inaugural event is coming up in a couple of weeks. So excited that's a great example. In fact, one of the things I made sure for the attendees, which is a small curated list of what we hope to be future CFOs, 50% of the attendees will be female, which is intentional. We've been really intentional on making sure we curate that list.
Yeah, and you've been very interested in working to advocate for opportunities that help marginalized groups. You've been very passionate about the power of diversity. There's been a lot of backlash against DEI. How does that inform your approach or the way you're tackling these issues?
Yeah, it's a fair question. It doesn't change my value system. I do appreciate that the backdrop has changed, but I do think there's still a moment where we can lead and still champion the things that are important to us. And so I continue to spend time at the Boys and Girls Club in San Francisco. I'm on the board there, and I just went through a really amazing event selecting their Youth of the Year. And so I do it through action, Julie. I try to make sure I continue to be involved in my community, continue to do everything I can in any format I can, including in my own organization. I'm the sponsor for the Mi Gente group at Toast, and that's really all of the Hispanics at Toast. And we're continuing our initiatives because we really believe representation is important.
Yeah, and important no matter what's going on in the backdrop. Is this something that you feel like, from a corporate standpoint, that the company has changed its approach, or are you still managing hiring and mentoring and all of the pieces of this in the same way?
Yeah, we've tried to not change our approach and tried to stick to our value system of the importance of diversity, the importance of making sure we get all the voices in the room. And so me being part of the leadership team at Toast and part of the employee resource group champion, it just helps me make sure that we haven't lost our focus. Because even though externally the backdrop has changed, you can still get a lot done in small increments if people like myself continue to have that passion in the workplace.
Yeah, fascinating and awesome. I want to make sure we talk about AI, because this is the topic that everyone is talking about. And
Yes.
Toast is leaning into AI. Explain to us what Toast is doing right now in this AI space.
Sure. We're really excited about our Toast IQ product. And so the way to think about Toast IQ is really as a restaurant operator having a co-pilot in your pocket. So imagine if you're a restaurant operator, you can conversationally ask the Toast IQ, I have 3 restaurants. Can you tell me what the volume of beer sales are in my restaurant in New York City versus my restaurant in Phoenix, as an example. And ideally, over time, as it gets smarter, it actually begins to help you take action. So, as an example, can you tell me if I'm out of milk in my cafe in San Francisco? Yes, you're out of milk. Would you like us to order some milk for you? Click a button. And so you can imagine with the data that we sit on at Toast, there's a whole host of opportunities that we can do. We can leverage to drive insight to our restaurants, but also help them take action and help them run a more efficient business. So, incredibly excited. A lot of our restaurants are saying this is game changing for them. So, very excited about what's possible. And this is early days. So, there's a lot that we can continue to do. And then in our own workplace, we're trying to make sure we're empowering our employees to adopt AI, even in my finance org, even in the marketing organization, to see what will bubble up as a use case that has persistence that can last over a long period of time.
Yeah, and it seems like, you took Toast public 5 years ago, and in the years since then, Toast has really expanded what it aims to do for your customers. How do you see Toast mission as growing and changing?
Our mission has remained consistent, which is let's help our restaurant operators, our merchants do what they love, which is typically hospitality. And the way you do that is you enable them with this amazing technology platform. And so as Toast continues to innovate across whether it's Toast IQ as an example of AI or helping restaurants with their payroll, helping restaurants with tips management, which is very hard at a restaurant at midnight when you're closing down shop and you really want to distribute tips across the employees. Whether it's helping them run campaigns, whether it's helping restaurant operators drive more business, drive offers to drive guests to a restaurant, as an example. These are all things in service of helping the restaurant run a better business, which allows them to then focus on hospitality, which is typically why a restaurant operator opens a restaurant, is they really want to, have fallen in love with the hospitality end of it, and they want to make sure the guest experience is amazing. So we're really the underpinning, the central nervous system of restaurants, and that's what we hope to continue to innovate to get ahead of what's coming. An example might be personalized experiences when you go to a restaurant. Elena and John, you're here again, you're regulars. Elena, do you want your gin and tonic? And John, do you want your beer? As an example, that could happen on my phone. It could happen when I sit down because it's a very personalized experience. Or, oh, Elena, we understand it's your daughter's 18th birthday. Would you want us to bring a birthday cake? So this is all enabled through technology in the background, and we're really excited about leveraging the data that underpins the Toast platform.
For you as a leader, both internally and in terms of what you're offering your customers, AI could be a game changer.
Absolutely, absolutely. We view it that way. I think it's not about when, it's how fast we can really drive innovation with AI. And I think everyone has become, even in our daily lives, we're using AI. So it's coming, it's a matter of when. And we're really taking advantage of the data we have underneath the platform. We power over 160,000 restaurants. So you can imagine the data that sits in our platform. Everything, for example, like with our benchmarking product, we can say, hey, look, a cheeseburger in the US costs $12. If you're not charging $12, that's an opportunity for you to consider changing a price. And so that's just a minor example, but there are so many examples of data that can really help a restaurant operator drive insight.
How do you use AI personally? Do you use it
Okay,
when
I
you're
use it every
coaching
day.
basketball or
I did use it. I did use it to find a press play. I typed uh, 8-year-old press play, something like that. And I got a really good tip. But my daughters are teenagers now. And so I gave my husband some tips. You should ask ChatGPT how to talk to Sam about teen dating. And he got a whole list. And so that was kind of fun. And
did
then
it
in the
work?
work,
Were they good
I heard him,
recommendations?
yes, I heard him talking to her, which I thought was fascinating. Like, wow, you use ChatGPT, good for you. And it did work. It did work. It helped frame the conversation for him, so that was great. And then in the workplace, just yesterday, I was using it. I had a contract that I wanted to look at. I had asked my team for the contract. I got the contract back, and it was 20 pages. And I just uploaded it to ChatGPT and said, "Can you summarize the key terms?" And within seconds, I had it. So I'm using it every day, all the time, personal and work.
And other things that you do, we're always curious, like what are the life hacks, right? You have 3 kids. You have 3 kids, is that right?
I have 2 kids, 2 daughters. They're 14 and 17 and in the middle of teenage years, so that's fun.
So you
My
have
husband,
yeah.
we've been married 20 years, so really fun to kind of raise the kids together.
But so what are your life hacks as a mom of 2 kids, CFO and president of this publicly traded company? What do you do to make your life easier? We've talked to change makers who have hacks when it comes to jet lag or using AI glasses. What are your secrets?
So then the number one thing I do is I work out religiously, regardless of what country I travel a lot, regardless of where I am. I view that as my time and mental health for me, just to really get grounded and investing in me. And so I'm pretty strict about that. I also make sure with the kids, especially now that they're getting older, and my daughter's going away to college this year, I try to make sure I keep the dinner time, as hard as it is, pretty sacred, and I tell the team about that. And I work for a East Coast company. I'm based in the West Coast, so we're trying to manage time zones, but I try to make sure that I keep a couple of hours very sacred. So those are my two life hacks, and definitely when I travel, I get in that time zone immediately. No naps, no
No
naps.
naps. And what is your workout? What's your workout of choice? Are you
I
playing
do I do a
basketball?
little bit of weights. I do Peloton in the morning. I do a boot camp that I've been doing for 17 years. And I also walk a lot. So I walk in my neighborhood. I make sure I get 12,000 steps a day. It's hard to do in the rain, but I still do it. And so those are a few, I would say, workout hacks, if you will.
And I know you've retired from coaching kids basketball, but do you feel like there's anything you've learned from that coaching experience that you've brought to your work as a CFO and
Oh my
president of
gosh, yes.
Toast?
Absolutely. I'll be honest, I have learned so much coaching and the parallels of coaching a team with the parallels at work. Everything from what's the goal, what's your stated vision? How do you change course when something's not going well? Like, how do you substitute players in and out? Another one I often talk about is you have to know who's going to take the last shot in that moment when it's 3 seconds left and the game's on the line and you got to pick someone. And in the workplace, it's similar. You might be going to do a pitch to a customer, or you might be pitching to the executive team. Should you take that, or should you ask someone on your team to take that? And so I always talk about it in the workplace as, should you pass the ball, or you're going to keep the ball? And let's just make sure we're passing the ball around a lot, because we want to give everyone the opportunity to have that stretch assignment. And so that's another example. In fact, I had a team where I had gotten the best player in the league. I had a draft, believe it or not, for 10-year-olds. And I thought, this is great. I'm going to win every game. And we did win the first game because Anna was her name. She scored all the points. And so it was great, but the joy of winning through one person was not great. And so through the course of the season, I started getting Anna to pass the ball. And so I shared that story with my team. And I said, that applies actually in the workplace. We don't want heroes in the workplace. We really want team effort in the workplace. So that's just one example I give a lot to the team. And it really resonates with the team. They understand the concept of sports and workplace is often a lot of parallels. So yeah, I love it. And plus you got to win.
Yeah,
There's something about
it's
winning.
awesome. I have to say my husband actually has coached our kids basketball teams over many years, and just getting one good player on the team does not mean you win. It's all about getting the kids to learn to pass the ball. And so I've just
Pass the
seen this
ball. Yeah,
play out. You got to pass the
absolutely.
ball. Great
Absolutely.
analogies for business and for life. You've talked about how much you've learned from your family, from your parents and your grandparents. How do you think you've evolved as a leader over the years, even since taking the company public?
Yeah, I think one of the most important evolutions I've made is just zooming out often as a leader and really driving clarity, because you're always, as a leader, going to be confronted with a curveball of some sort, something you didn't expect. And part of what we lean on, at least I remember when I was earlier in my career, I would look up and say, who has the experience? Who's seen this before? And now I'm that person. I'm that person that in the room can offer perspective. And so I remind myself, like, don't take that for granted. In fact, share the wealth of your knowledge, because that's where some of the greatest learnings come for the people that are going to come behind me and behind all of us. And so that's probably the most important thing. I try to make sure I'm zooming out and share that perspective that I probably wouldn't have done 10 years ago because I was in it. I was in the thick of it and trying to solve it myself, and realizing that actually take a minute, take a breath, zoom out, give perspective, get all the voices together. And that's what great leadership is.
And what do you think your leadership superpower is?
I think I'm great at connecting the dots, great at perspective, and like I said, zooming out and not getting caught up in the micro moments, but really thinking about what is the needle moving thing that we have to worry about, and sharing that vision with folks to bring them along this journey.
This is a kind of a granular question, but it seems like everyone can get caught up in the micro moments, right? We're all in our day. We're all trying to get to the
Absolutely.
next email, the next meeting. How do you learn to hit pause and take a step back? Do you need to schedule that in your calendar?
You should. I don't do it that way. I have naturally trained myself to do it that way as a CFO and as executive of a company. If you sweat the micro moments, you're not going to be in that job very long, because you're going to burn yourself out. And I think I learned that really early in my career, is to, even when I was not a C-level executive, I remember thinking, okay, I have to have perspective. How needle moving is this? Will I get up tomorrow and put on my pants the same way, at the end of the day? And so I learned that skill. And honestly, it might have been my dad, because my dad was always super steady growing up, no matter what, no matter what was going on, he was always super steady. And so in the workplace, I find myself being that steady, calm voice. And often it's take a minute, take a breath. And so I try to share that stability and steadiness in the workplace. And it really does help calm the room down. If you're not, overly, not super high, not super low, just very steady. And as an executive, I think, given all of the things that happen, you will be confronted with something you think that wasn't expected, and how you respond sometimes is actually more important than actually what's happening.
Well, that is great advice. Elena, thank you so much for joining us on this Changemakers and Power Players podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was a wonderful conversation, and thank you for having me, Julia.
One more thing before we go. We hope you'll join us at our upcoming Changemakers Summit, Thursday, April 16th in New York City. We'll be celebrating the inspiring women on the 3rd annual CNBC Changemakers list, with interviews and conversations with the leaders driving transformation and innovation across all sectors of the economy. To learn more about this incredible event, go to cnbc.com/changemakers.